The telehandler dropped another framed wall onto my property before I could reach the broken fence. Its reverse alarm punched through the dawn. Beep, 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 while two framers guided the wall over fresh concrete. 40 feet of my cedar fence lay twisted in the red Tennessee clay, and beyond it stood a foundation where my woods had been 3 days earlier. Not near my land. On it. I knew because the northeast corner of that foundation sat almost 30 feet past the fence line my father and I had maintained since I was a teenager. Worse, the crew had stacked roof trusses across the gravel turn I used to get my dump trucks back to my equipment pad. Then I saw the orange stake. Lot 18, rear corner. It had been driven into the dirt beside an old galvanized post my father used to call the iron corner. That made no sense. I stepped over a cedar rail and raised both hands. Stop the lift. The operator killed the hydraulics. Diesel settled into a low rumble. Fresh-cut lumber and wet concrete hung thick in the air. A man in a Bellwether Custom Homes vest walked toward me. You the neighbor? I'm the owner. He glanced toward the house. Lot belongs to Hawthorne Ridge. The lot might. That foundation doesn't. His expression tightened. I'm Owen Price. Superintendent. I've got stamped plans and a permit. And I've got 6.8 acres that were here before your plans. I pulled the measuring wheel from my truck. I grade house sites for a living. I know the difference between a fence and a legal boundary, and I wasn't stupid enough to claim a cedar post settled anything. But I also knew where my equipment road ran, where the woods began, and where my father had taught me not to push fill because the ground dropped toward the creek. I rolled 34 feet from the old fence to the far corner of the foundation. Concrete. Garage stakes. Retaining wall paint. All of it inside ground my family had treated as ours for decades. A white Lexus stopped behind the construction trailers. Claire Whitmore stepped out carrying a rolled plan set under one arm. She didn't look surprised to see me. That bothered me more than the excavator. Dan, she said, I was hoping we could avoid this. Then tell them to stop building. Claire handed Owen a sheet before answering me. Your fence was placed incorrectly years ago. Hawthorne Ridge is developing Lot 18 according to the recorded subdivision boundary. You knew I disputed this? We anticipated confusion. Confusion. Behind her, a framer fired 3 nails into the new wall. Pop, pop, pop. I took out my phone and started photographing everything. The broken fence posts, tire tracks, orange stakes, foundation corners, garage layout, permit placard, even the old iron post. Claire watched me. You can document whatever you like. I intend to. Owen stepped aside and called his office. For 10 minutes the site went almost still except for idling engines. Then he came back. We're cleared to continue. By who? Claire answered. The HOA's counsel confirmed the boundary was already verified. She said it like the argument had ended months before I knew one existed. The telehandler started moving again. I backed away from the machinery and photographed the permit number. That was when Claire's rolled plan slipped against her coat and opened far enough for me to see the property sketch. I took one step closer. The creek behind my land was drawn bending east. I stared at it. That creek had flooded my father's lower pasture twice. I'd installed drainage above it. I could walk its bends in the dark. It didn't turn east. It turned west. I looked from the drawing to the orange stake, then toward the utility transformer standing beside the subdivision road. The transformer wasn't where the plan said it should be either. Claire rolled the sheet closed. Behind us, the crew raised the next wall. And for the first time that morning, I stopped wondering whether somebody had measured my property wrong. I started wondering why their map described land that wasn't there. I spent the next hour walking the edge of my property with a measuring wheel in one hand and a grading laser in the other. The more I checked, the worse Claire's map looked. Pink construction flags ran through the woods in a straight line that had never existed before. 2 white oaks, both wider than my shoulders, had orange X marks sprayed across their trunks. A temporary stone driveway curved off the subdivision road and cut directly across the turning radius I used for my dump trucks. That wasn't cosmetic. If they boxed that corner in, I couldn't get a loaded truck back to my equipment pad without backing nearly 300 feet. I photographed every flag and every paint mark. Then I moved both trailers farther east before anybody could trap them. By 8:30, the first concrete truck arrived. Its drum turned slowly as it rolled past me, tires grinding crushed limestone into the dirt. Claire stood near the permit board talking to Owen like she'd been running job sites her whole life. I walked over. You're pouring more concrete? Owen looked uncomfortable. Footings for the garage extension. On disputed ground. Claire answered before he could. On lot 18. She pointed toward a new sign wired to a temporary fence panel. Private construction site. Authorized personnel only. Then she looked at me. Dan, from this point forward, entering the construction area could be considered trespassing. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because I was standing 20 yards from the place where my father had taught me to grease a tractor. You're telling me I can trespass on my own land? I'm telling you what our records show. Our records. That phrase stayed with me. I went home and called my sister. Leah, I need Dad's property box. There was a pause. The one in storage. Everything. Tax papers, old photos, timber receipts. Don't sort it. Just bring it. She arrived 2 hours later with a gray plastic tote covered in dust. We opened it on my kitchen table while construction noise carried through the walls. Most of it was useless. Old county tax bills, timber sale receipts, insurance papers, a faded survey sketch I'd already seen. Then Leah pulled out a Polaroid. I was maybe 15 in the picture, skinny as a fence rail, holding a cedar post while Dad stood beside me with a digging bar. Behind us was the old galvanized post. The iron corner. I turned the photo over. Nothing written on the back. Not yet useful, but I put it aside. Then I remembered the transformer. I walked back out to the road. A green utility transformer had sat beside Hawthorne Ridge since the subdivision was built. Claire's plan showed it several yards inside Lot 18. In reality, it stood nearly 30 feet north of the line her stakes claimed was correct. Transformers don't wander. Neither do drainage boxes. Either somebody had built half the subdivision in the wrong place, or Claire's map had a serious problem. I zoomed in on a photograph I'd taken of her plan. There was a surveying company listed in the title block. Mason and Reed Surveying. I called the number. A receptionist transferred me to a project manager named Carl. I gave him the subdivision, lot number, and drawing date. Keyboard clicks came through the phone. Then silence. We've done work in Hawthorne Ridge, he said. But not that. You didn't survey lot 18? No, sir. I looked through my window at another wall rising above the trees. Your company name is on the plan. Another pause. Longer this time. Carl's voice changed. Send me a copy. I ended the call staring at that White House frame. Until then, I thought Claire might be relying on a bad survey. Now I had a different problem. The company named on her boundary plan said the plan wasn't theirs. I emailed Carl at Mason and Reed the clearest photo I had of Claire's plan, then drove straight to Marcus Bell's office with the rest of my pictures spread across the passenger seat. Marcus had surveyed drainage jobs for me twice before. 62, gray beard, sun-baked forearms, the kind of man who trusted monuments more than memories. He studied the title block first, then the creek, then the transformer. This isn't enough to tell you where the line is, he said. I know, but it's enough to tell me somebody needs to retrace it. That was the first useful answer I'd gotten all day. By noon we were back at Hawthorne Ridge with a total station, locator, flagging, and the original subdivision plat Marcus pulled from county records. We didn't start at my fence. That surprised me. Marcus started nearly 400 feet north, at a brass cap beside the curb. Fence lines lie, he said, setting the tripod. Concrete and recorded control points usually lie less. We moved south one piece at a time. A drainage inlet. A road centerline. A utility easement marker behind a row of crepe myrtles. Another surviving monument near Lot 16. Each point gave Marcus another angle. Each angle made Claire's construction stakes look worse. Her claimed line shoved an old storm inlet outside the subdivision drainage tract and placed part of the utility easement on land the recorded plat said should never have contained it. Marcus crouched beside the curb, checking numbers on his data collector. If their line is right, he said, then somebody built this infrastructure wrong 25 years ago. Possible. Possible. He looked toward the new house. Not likely. That mattered. Not proof, but something real. We worked our way toward my side through honeysuckle and cedar brush. Marcus set 3 temporary flagged points where his measurements predicted the old subdivision boundary should track. I photographed each one with landmarks in frame. Good thing I did. The next morning, 2 were gone. Not bent. Not blown over. Gone. One wooden lath had been pulled clean out of packed soil. leaving a narrow rectangular hole. As I stood there, an HOA maintenance cart rolled away along the subdivision path. Claire was at the construction site 10 minutes later. Did your people remove survey markers? Her face stayed perfectly calm. I have no idea what you're referring to. I showed her the empty hole. She barely glanced down. You should make sure your surveyor isn't placing unauthorized markers on Hawthorne Ridge property. They were on my side. That remains disputed. Organized answer. No hesitation. She'd been ready for that question. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later and ignored the missing flags. He opened the original plat across the hood of his truck and tapped the southern corner notation. M4, he said. The original survey called for a concrete monument. We searched with a probe, locator, and hand shovel. Nothing. No concrete. No brass cap. No broken top. Just disturbed soil and old roots. That afternoon, I went back through Dad's gray storage tote. This time I studied the Polaroid instead of the property papers. 15-year-old me. Cedar post. Dad holding a digging bar. The galvanized iron post stood behind us. I flipped the photo over again and held it under the kitchen light. There was faint pencil writing along the bottom edge I'd missed before. M4 buried after dozer hit it. New pipe 6 foot south. I read it twice. Then called Marcus. The monument wasn't lost, I said. Dad knew something happened to it. Outside, nail guns cracked from lot 18. For the first time, I had a specific thing to find. Not Claire's map. Not my fence. Whatever my father meant by a new pipe 6 feet south. By Monday morning, Claire had stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. The first thing I saw was black privacy mesh stretched along the temporary fence beside lot 18. The second was a skid steer ripping out brush along the edge of my equipment lane. I parked my truck sideways before the operator reached the gravel. Kill it. He dropped the bucket. Owen came around the house carrying a radio. Dan, we've got approved site access through here. You've got access through lot 18. That lane is how I get equipment to the back of my property. He looked toward Claire. She was already walking over. We're widening the construction entrance, she said. Your trucks have been crossing too close to the active site. My trucks were here before your active site. Claire's expression barely changed. This is temporary. Temporary had already cost me 40 feet of fence and 2 oak trees marked for removal. I took pictures, then moved both dump trucks before the opening got any tighter. That afternoon, I rented a storage yard 6 miles away and hauled my trailers there. It cost me $140 a day. I hated spending it, but I hated the idea of Claire trapping everything I owned behind one disputed strip even more. Before dark, I mounted 2 trail cameras on trees well inside the part of my acreage nobody could reasonably argue about. Not pointed at Claire's house. Not pointed into anybody's yard. Just my equipment lane and the construction edge. I photographed their locations too. At the time, it felt like basic insurance. The next morning, the pressure changed again. A bellwether excavator was digging a sewer trench from the new house toward the subdivision main. The bucket tore across my old gravel path like a zipper opening the earth. I walked up while the operator was swinging another load of red clay. Owen. He came over immediately. That path is mine. The utility route is on the approved plan. There it is again. What? The plan. He didn't answer. I stepped closer to the trench, but stayed behind the safety barrier. That was when sunlight flashed off something in the cut bank. Metal. About 2 inches thick. Old galvanized pipe, crushed slightly on top, rusted almost brown. The excavator bucket had scraped one side clean. Under the rust was faded blue paint. Dad's note hit me so hard I could hear his voice. New pipe 6 foot south. I pulled out my phone. Wide shot first. Then closer. The pipe. The trench. The corner of the foundation. The transformer in the background. I even photographed my boots beside the undisturbed edge so the scale would be obvious later. Claire noticed. What are you doing? Documenting my property being excavated. That pipe is probably abandoned utility. Maybe. I didn't tell her about Dad's note. That was the one advantage I still had. She didn't know why I cared. By lunch, the trench was backfilled. The pipe disappeared under 6 feet of packed dirt and gravel. Then 2 concrete barriers showed up at the east end of my alternate access. Claire called it an emergency lane controlled by Hawthorne Ridge. By 3 o'clock, my compact excavator was boxed in behind the construction site on one side and concrete on the other. I had a county drainage job scheduled for Wednesday. No excavator, no job. I called Owen. He sounded genuinely uncomfortable. I can't move the barriers without HOA authorization. Claire wouldn't give it. At 4:30, a pump truck rolled onto Lot 18. Its outriggers dropped with a metallic slam. Concrete started flowing into the garage slab and retaining wall forms. I stood behind my damaged fence listening to the pump hammer and watching gray concrete swallow the last open sections of ground. By sunset, Claire had done exactly what a careful person would never do during a boundary dispute. She had turned her claim into something expensive to undo, and my equipment was trapped behind it. The first thing I lost was Wednesday's drainage job. At 6:10 that morning, I stood beside my compact excavator with the engine running and nowhere to go. The bellwether fence boxed me in from the west. Claire's concrete barriers blocked the east. My trailer sat empty on the road. I called the county project manager before he had to call me. "Mike, I can't mobilize." Silence. Then, "Dan, I've got a crew waiting." "I know. We need that ditch open today." "I know." Another pause. "I'm giving it to Keller." There went $7,600 in work. I shut the excavator down. The sudden silence hurt worse than the engine noise. By Friday, I was in Chancery Court asking for emergency relief. Claire's attorney arrived with binders, stamped permits, the recorded Hawthorne Ridge plat, a title commitment, and photographs showing the HOA had supposedly maintained the disputed strip for years. I had Marcus's preliminary measurements, Dad's note, photographs, and a lot of things that didn't add up. But I didn't yet have a completed boundary retracement. Judge Carver listened carefully. Then she gave me half of what I wanted. Bellwether could not sell or occupy the house until ownership was resolved. But construction could continue. Claire walked out of the courthouse like she'd won everything. Technically, she hadn't. It looked that way anyway. Monday morning, a crane lifted roof trusses over the trees. By Tuesday, plywood sheathing covered the walls. From my kitchen window, I could watch somebody else's house getting bigger on land I still believed was mine. My checking account moved the opposite direction. Survey deposit. Attorney retainer. Storage yard. Lost work. Replacement gravel. By the end of the week, I had spent $18,400 from the money I'd saved to replace my oldest dump truck. That truck had 312,000 miles and a transmission that whined every time I pulled uphill. Now it would have to last. Then Leah showed me the neighborhood newsletter on her phone. Hawthorne Ridge resolves legacy fence disagreement, the headline said. Claire was quoted underneath. A historical fence placement issue was being reviewed through appropriate channels. Fence placement issue. There was a framed house behind my trees. Leah put the phone down. "Dan, maybe we should talk about selling them the strip." I looked at her. She wasn't taking Claire's side. That almost made it worse. "We could lose more than the land," she said quietly. For the first time, I wondered if she was right. That night I sat at the kitchen table building a file for the county contract I'd lost. Emails, schedule, trailer photos, pictures of the blocked access. Then I opened the sewer trench photographs from part 4. The blue pipe. I zoomed in. Its top wasn't just crushed. It had been flattened deliberately, almost like a cap. I pulled Dad's old Polaroid from the plastic sleeve. Teenage me. Cedar post. Dad. The iron corner. And behind my shoulder, half hidden by brush, was a short blue-painted pipe with a wooden survey lath beside it. I put the phone next to the photograph. Same diameter. Same faded blue. Same flattened top. The house Claire had rushed to build had forced Bellwether to dig that sewer trench. And that trench had exposed something that had been buried for decades. I called Marcus. Would surveyors ever drive a pipe near a monument so they could find the real corner again? He didn't answer immediately. Then his voice sharpened. "Yes." "What would they call it?" "A witness marker." I looked back at Dad's handwriting. New pipe 6 foot south. For the first time all week, the number didn't feel like a loss. Marcus was at my kitchen table before 8 the next morning. I laid Dad's Polaroid beside the sewer trench photo and slid both under the pendant light. Same blue paint. Same 2-inch galvanized pipe. Same flattened cap. Marcus put on his reading glasses and leaned closer. "If that's a witness marker," he said, "it should point us somewhere specific. 6 feet north. 5.8, maybe. Surveyors don't usually write poetry." That was the first time I'd smiled in days. We drove to the county records office and pulled the original Hawthorne Ridge survey file Marcus had referenced earlier. Not Claire's construction plan. The old field notes. Marcus turned pages slowly until his fingers stopped. There it was. 4 set concrete. Below it, wit pipe S5. 8 foot, I stared at the notation. Not 6 feet exactly. 5.8. Dad had rounded it because Dad wasn't writing a legal description. He was leaving himself a reminder. Marcus placed the old field note beside a printout of my trench photograph. Then he drew a line from the visible blue pipe toward where M4 should have been. If the pipe in your photo is original, he said, the monument should be about 5 feet 10 inches north of it. Under the construction? Looks that way. We went back to the property without crossing the temporary fence. Using the surviving subdivision monuments Marcus had already located, he set up his total station and shot the line again. The laser clicked. He moved the prism, shot another point, then another. The numbers started closing. The creek contradiction from Claire's plan. The transformer sitting 30 feet from where her drawing placed it. The drainage inlet Marcus had flagged in part 3. They weren't separate mistakes anymore. They all leaned the same direction. South. Marcus marked a point on his tablet. If these controls hold, their lot 18 line is shifted about 31 feet. I looked toward the half-sheathed house. How much land does that steal? Roughly 6/10 of an acre. I'll calculate it properly. 0.61, as it turned out. Enough to make Claire's lot bigger. Enough to fit the garage, retaining wall, and backyard shown in the sales rendering. Still not enough to win anything. A witness pipe could be moved. Dad's photograph could be challenged. Even the field notes only mattered if the actual monument was still where the original surveyor said it. So I stopped talking. I copied everything. The Polaroid went into a protective sleeve. The trench photos went onto an external drive and cloud storage. Marcus exported his measurements and kept his own copy. I printed the original field note and stored the certified copy separately from my work files. Claire saw us measuring from the road that afternoon. She walked over carrying coffee, still chasing the old fence. I looked at her. Something like that. She smiled. Behind her, carpenters were wrapping the house in white weather barrier. She still thought the fence was my argument. Good. That evening Marcus marked one calculated location on an aerial image. A 6-foot square. That was all we needed access to. Not the whole house. Not the whole lot. One patch of red dirt beside the foundation. My attorney expected me to ask the court to stop construction again. I told him not to. Ask for supervised excavation. He looked at the map. That's it. That's it. The next morning, we filed a narrow motion requesting permission to excavate that single 6-foot square area under independent observation. Claire had spent weeks making this fight bigger. I had finally found a reason to make it very small. Judge Carver granted the excavation request 3 days later. Not the whole disputed strip. Not even 10 feet. One 6-foot square beside the rear foundation, supervised, photographed, and witnessed by both sides. Claire arrived in her white Lexus 10 minutes before the excavator. She wore a navy blazer, carried a leather portfolio, and looked completely relaxed. That worried me. Marcus set up his total station near the road. Owen stood beside Bellwether's attorney. My lawyer stayed close enough to hear everything, but far enough to keep the site from turning into a circus. Claire looked at the orange construction stake still standing beside the privacy fence. All this for an old fence corner, she said. I didn't correct her. The small excavator eased into position. Its bucket scraped away the first 6 inches of red clay. Nothing. Another pass. Roots. Gravel. Broken chunks of concrete from recent grading. My stomach tightened. If Dad's note had referred to something moved decades ago, I had just spent thousands of dollars convincing a judge to watch me dig an empty hole. Claire folded her arms. The bucket went down again. Clunk. The operator stopped. Marcus stepped forward. Hand tools from here. Nobody spoke. Owen brought over a shovel and a small digging bar. Marcus knelt in the dirt while cameras from both legal teams recorded the excavation. Gray concrete appeared beneath the clay. Not poured footing concrete. Older. Weathered. Square. Marcus brushed dirt away with his glove until a brass disc caught the light. M4. I heard Claire exhale behind me. That was all. No panic. No confession. She was too smart for that. Marcus photographed the monument in place, measured its depth, then set the prism directly over it. Now we check whether it belongs here, he said. That part mattered more than the stamp. Anyone could argue old concrete had shifted. Marcus shot M4 to the surviving subdivision controls we had already located. 1 point. 2nd point. 3rd. He checked his collector twice, then looked at my attorney. It closes. How close? Claire's lawyer asked. Marcus gave him the tolerance figures. No drama. Just numbers. The legal boundary ran roughly 31 feet north of Claire's construction line, through the garage slab, through the continuous foundation, across part of the load-bearing rear wall. Even the sewer lateral we had watched them trench crossed it. Claire stared at the instrument screen, then turned to her attorney. They spoke quietly for almost a minute. When they came back, Claire had changed tactics. Not surrendered. Changed tactics. My position remains the same, she said. Mr. Mercer's father acknowledged the adjusted boundary years ago. My lawyer looked at her. In writing, Claire opened the leather portfolio. Yes. She handed over a document labeled Boundary Acknowledgement Agreement, dated May 2006. Dad's name was typed beneath a signature. Attached behind it was a site exhibit. I felt the old anger rise, but I kept my mouth shut. If Claire believed this document saved her, I wanted her to rely on it. My lawyer asked, You're representing that this is the agreement Hawthorne Ridge relies upon? Claire nodded. It's been maintained in the association's property file, and the attached exhibit was part of that agreement. Yes. Her attorney looked at her briefly, then said nothing. The exchange was being recorded as part of the court's supervised proceeding. My lawyer took the packet. I looked over his shoulder. Same shifted creek. Same enlarged Lot 18 geometry. Then my eyes stopped on a small rectangle near the drainage line. CB 7. For a second, the construction noise disappeared. I knew that label. Not from Dad. From my own work. My company had helped install Catch Basin 7 when Hawthorne Ridge upgraded that drainage run. I remembered the year because I had bought my first used excavator with the money from that contract. 2011. Claire was standing beside a monument proving her line was wrong, while formally relying on a supposedly 2006 exhibit showing infrastructure that did not exist until 5 years later. She closed her portfolio. I think that resolves the historical issue. I said nothing. I just looked at CB 7 again. Now I had it. Claire's attorney tried to use the 2006 agreement anyway. At the evidentiary hearing 2 weeks later, he placed it on the document stand and called it proof that Dad had accepted Hawthorne Ridge's adjusted boundary. Judge Carver looked at Marcus. Before we get to that agreement, establish the physical line. Marcus stood beside a large survey exhibit showing the original subdivision. No speeches. He started with M4, the concrete monument we had dug out beside the foundation. Then the old field note. M4 set concrete, width pipe S5, 8 foot. Then my sewer trench photograph appeared on the screen. The blue galvanized pipe. The same one Bellwether's excavator had exposed while cutting off my equipment access. Marcus overlaid its measured position with the recovered monument. 5.8 feet. Exactly where the original surveyor said it should be. Claire stopped taking notes. Marcus moved to the surviving subdivision controls. The brass curb cap. The Lot 16 monument. The road alignment. The measurements closed. The legal boundary ran approximately 31 feet north of Claire's construction stakes. Judge Carver looked at the house diagram. So the orange stakes were wrong. Yes, Your Honor. First assumption gone. Claire's attorney stood. That does not address the later agreement. Judge Carver nodded. Then address it. My lawyer handed her 2 enlarged maps. Claire's Lot 18 plan on the left. The original recorded plat on the right. He pointed first to the creek. East on Claire's drawing. West on the original geometry. Then the transformer. Then the drainage inlet. All those things I had stared at before I knew what they meant. Every contradiction moved in the same direction as the false boundary. Second layer. The map hadn't contained random drafting mistakes. It had consistently enlarged Lot 18. Claire leaned toward her attorney and whispered something. Then he returned to Dad's alleged acknowledgement. Whatever occurred with the earlier survey, he said, Mr. Mercer's father subsequently accepted the modified line. That was when my lawyer placed the 2006 exhibit on the screen. He zoomed into one small drainage symbol. CB 7. Ms. Whitmore, he said, you testified during the supervised excavation that this exhibit was attached to the 2006 agreement? Claire sat straighter. That is how it exists in the HOA file, and Hawthorne Ridge relies on it. Yes. He handed Judge Carver a certified county infrastructure record. Catch Basin 7. Installation completed September 2011. Then he handed her my old company invoice from that drainage project. Same location. Same identifier. Same year. 2011. 5 years after the supposed exhibit. The courtroom changed. Not loudly. Claire's attorney stopped writing. One of the Hawthorne Ridge board members in the back row leaned forward and took off his glasses. Judge Carver reread the date twice. Claire tried one defense. The exhibit may have been updated later for reference. My lawyer nodded. That is possible. He let that sit. But then it cannot prove what boundary Daniel Mercer's father acknowledged in 2006. Silence. Third layer gone. Then Owen Price testified. Bellwether had not commissioned the disputed boundary survey. The HOA had supplied the Lot 18 plan. And after I objected on the first morning, Owen had contacted his office and been told the HOA had already verified the boundary. Finally came the title correspondence. Months before construction, Claire had received a written exception recommending independent verification of Lot 18's southern boundary before development or sale. She built anyway. That was the piece that made everything else impossible to explain as innocent confidence. Judge Carver looked down at the foundation diagram again. Garage slab, rear load-bearing wall, retaining system, sewer line, all crossing my land. Claire's lawyer proposed that I simply be compensated for the 0.61 acre. I shook my head once. My attorney answered for me. Judge Carver returned 10 minutes later. The court finds title to the disputed 0.61 acre tract vested in Daniel Mercer. Claire didn't move. The structure constitutes an unauthorized encroachment. Another pause. Removal is ordered. Across the aisle, the Hawthorne Ridge board members stopped looking at me. They were looking at Claire. The first sound after Judge Carver's order was Claire's attorney closing his binder. Not slamming it, just closing it. A soft leather thump in a quiet courtroom. 3 weeks later, I heard a different sound from Lot 18. Hydraulic steel biting concrete. Bellwether came back with a demolition crew, but nobody treated it like a victory parade. They salvaged windows, doors, framing lumber, and anything else that could be reused. Then the excavator worked its way through the garage slab, the rear foundation, and finally the sections that couldn't be separated into a lawful house. I stood behind my rebuilt temporary access, watching the structure come down in pieces. The same white weather wrap that had risen above my trees fluttered in the bucket before disappearing into a roll-off container. By the end of the week, the house was gone. So were Claire's concrete barriers. The east access reopened first. Then Bellwether removed the temporary construction drive that had cut across my turning radius. A grading crew restored the old equipment lane, rebuilt the drainage slope, and spread fresh gravel where the sewer trench had crossed my path. The first time I drove my compact excavator out without asking anyone's permission, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt normal. I hadn't realized how much I missed normal. The financial repair took longer. The HOA's insurer covered the documented property restoration. Bellwether and Hawthorne Ridge fought privately over who was responsible for what, which was exactly where that fight belonged. My lost county drainage contract was part of the damages I could actually prove. So were portions of the survey and access costs the court allowed. Nobody handed me some fantasy million-dollar check. I got enough to repair what had been damaged and replace what the fight had actually cost me. That mattered more. The $18,400 hole in my equipment reserve stopped feeling permanent. 2 months later, I traded the old dump truck with 312,000 miles for a newer used Mack that didn't howl every time I climbed a grade. Leah came with me to pick it up. We hadn't talked much during the worst weeks. Not really. She'd wanted me to sell the strip. I'd heard that as surrender. She'd heard my refusal as gambling with both our futures. On the drive home, she stared through the windshield for a while. I didn't understand what they were actually doing, she said. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't do a great job explaining it. That was as close to an apology as either of us needed. A week later, we signed a new family ownership agreement. No surprise transfers. No major land decisions without both of us sitting at the same table. Not because I didn't trust her. Because Dad had left us property, and we had almost let somebody else turn uncertainty between us into leverage. Claire resigned from the Hawthorne Ridge board before the next annual meeting. There was no cheering, no public humiliation, just a new president, a new boundary verification requirement for HOA property projects, and a lot fewer people pretending the Lot 18 mess had been a fence misunderstanding. Marcus returned one cool morning with a modern capped monument. He set it beside M4. Then we rebuilt the cedar fence. Not where Dad remembered it. Not where I remembered it. where the measurements said it belonged. We left the old blue witness pipe in place. Faded paint, flattened cap, still 5.8 feet south of the monument, doing the same quiet job it had done for decades. Months later, I backed the Mac down the restored gravel lane before sunrise. Beep, beep, beep. The sound rolled through the trees exactly like the telehandler alarm that had woken me the morning strangers started building on my land. I stopped beside the fence. M4 sat protected in the soil. The cedar boards were straight. The blue pipe caught the first strip of morning light. Beyond the line, there was nothing but open ground. Mine.